The billionaire CEO was not supposed to look afraid in front of 300 people. The cameras were not supposed to keep recording after the ballroom doors locked from the inside. The guards were not supposed to lose control of the 48th floor in under 60 seconds. The guests were not supposed to whisper prayers into champagne glasses while the city glittered far below them. And the janitor at the back of the room was not supposed to be the calmest man alive. No one knew that Ethan Walker had spent half his life training for the kind of silence most people only meet in nightmares. The Whitmore Global Charity Gala had been built to impress, and it did, at least for the first hour. Crystal lights washed the ceiling in warm gold. A jazz trio played near the marble columns. Waiters moved through the crowd with silver trays while executives laughed a little too loudly and donors praised one another for kindness that had cost them almost nothing. Charlotte Whitmore stood near the stage in a white evening dress, graceful, composed, and untouchable in the way powerful people learn to be when everyone wants something from them. At 36, she owned more companies than some families owned photographs. Yet her smile carried the tired discipline of a woman who had not been seen as a person in years. Near the service entrance, Ethan Walker pushed a mop across the polished floor with quiet patience. His navy work shirt had his name stitched over the pocket, though most people never looked low enough to read it. 42 years old, lean, pale from winter shifts, with tired blue eyes and a folded drawing from his 9-year-old daughter Lily tucked inside his wallet. He moved through the room like a shadow that had learned not to ask permission to exist. A junior vice president stepped backward without looking and nearly kicked over Ethan's bucket. "Watch it, maintenance," the man snapped. "People with real jobs are trying to work." A few nearby guests smiled into their glasses. Ethan steadied the bucket with one hand. "Yes, sir," he said softly. "I'll keep the walkway clear." He did not explain that he had worked 16 hours since Monday. He did not mention that Lily had a spelling test in the morning and had made him promise to quiz her over breakfast. He simply lowered his gaze, guided the mop around the man's polished shoes, and kept moving. That was dignity, not weakness. That was control, not fear. Across the room, Charlotte dropped a page from her speech while stepping toward the podium, and the paper slid across the floor until it stopped near Ethan's boot. He picked it up before anyone else noticed and handed it to her with both care and distance. "Some promises are worth keeping," he said after seeing the heading about scholarships for children of fallen service members. Charlotte paused, studying his face as if she had heard a familiar note in a forgotten song. "Thank you," she replied. Before she could ask his name, the lights flickered once, then twice. The music died. The glass door sealed with a heavy magnetic click, and a man's voice rolled through the speakers, smooth, bitter, and too pleased with itself. "Good evening, Charlotte. Tonight, the Queen signs away her kingdom." The room froze. Charlotte turned toward the balcony control booth, her expression still brave, but her fingers tightened around the speech Ethan had just returned. Guests reached for phones and found no signal. Security staff pressed earpieces and heard only static. Panic began as a breath, then spread like cold air under a door. But Ethan looked up at the emergency lights, then at the camera domes, then at the east stairwell sign blinking out of rhythm. His hand slowly left the mop handle. His eyes changed first. Not wider, not afraid, sharper, quieter. The kind of eyes that had counted exits before anyone else knew they needed one. The first sound after the lockdown was not a scream. It was a fork slipping from someone's hand and ringing against a porcelain plate, small and bright, as if the whole room had been struck like a bell. Charlotte held her posture near the stage, stunning beneath the pale wash of emergency lighting, her blonde hair pinned neatly, her face composed with a beauty that felt almost unreal because fear had not erased her grace. "Everyone stay calm," she said, and her voice carried farther than the microphone ever had. A board member whispered, "What is happening?" Another said, "Where is security?" A woman near the windows murmured, "I cannot call out." The city below kept shining, completely unaware that 300 feet above the street, wealth, influence, and reputation had become useless things. Ethan moved before the crowd understood why he was moving. He did not rush. He did not draw attention. He set the mop against a service wall, reached beneath the linen-draped supply station, and pulled out the small maintenance ring issued to night staff, the kind executives mocked until the power failed and doors forgot who owned the building. A young catering worker stared at him, her hands shaking around a tray of untouched desserts. "Mr. Walker, are we trapped?" she asked. Ethan looked at the east hallway, then the ceiling vent, then the narrow service door hidden behind a row of floral arrangements. "Not if people listen," he answered. "Can you help me?" She nodded too quickly. "Tell that family by the pillar to move away from the glass." Quietly. "Then bring me the red access card from the coat room desk." "But I am not security. Tonight, you are someone who can save lives by staying steady." The words seemed to place her feet back under her. She swallowed, turned, and walked with a purpose she had not owned 10 seconds earlier. That was how Ethan worked. He gave people back their courage in pieces small enough to hold. Near the center of the ballroom, Grant Mercer's voice returned through the speaker system, calm, polished, poisoned by old humiliation. He congratulated the guests on finally paying attention. He told Charlotte to remain visible. He told the board that a document would arrive soon, and that signatures would prevent further embarrassment. He never raised his tone, which made the room colder. Charlotte looked toward the control booth, then toward the locked entrances, calculating like a woman trained by boardrooms, but not by captivity. Her eyes found Ethan again. He was no longer merely the handsome, tired janitor with quiet blue eyes and a work shirt. He was reading the room the way a seasoned pilot reads weather, not by panic, but by pressure. Ethan pointed 2 fingers toward the service corridor, then lowered his palm. "Wait." Charlotte understood enough to keep talking. "Grant," she said clearly, "whatever you want, humiliating frightened guests will not restore your name." A soft laugh answered from the speakers. "My name was taken by people in expensive clothes." Ethan took 3 silent steps behind the bar, where a backup panel blinked amber instead of red. Wrong color. Wrong sequence. Not a full system takeover. A local override. His jaw tightened, not from anger, but recognition. Someone had studied the building, but not its bones. In his pocket, his phone vibrated once without signal, a saved alarm for Lily's bedtime message. He could almost hear her small voice from earlier that evening, asking him to come home safe. Ethan closed his hand around the access card the catering girl slipped to him, then looked across the room at Charlotte. For one brief second, Billionaire and Janitor shared the same truth. Money could not open that door. Calm might. The red access card did not belong to power, wealth, or rank. It belonged to a 19-year-old catering assistant who had been invisible until Ethan Walker looked at her and made her necessary. She placed it in his palm as if she were handing him something fragile, and Ethan gave her the smallest nod. "Good work, Megan," he said, reading the name stitched on her black vest. Her eyes widened because almost no one in that room had called her by name all evening. "What do I do now?" she whispered. "You breathe. You stay near the families. You move only when I signal." She nodded, and in that frightened ballroom, obedience did not feel like submission. It felt like hope beginning to organize itself. Charlotte remained near the stage, impossibly beautiful under the softened emergency glow, her white gown now less like a symbol of wealth and more like a flag that refused to fall. She knew every face in the room, every donor, every board member, every rival pretending concern while measuring damage. Yet the one face she searched for was Ethan's. The janitor was beside the West service panel now, crouched low, sliding the access card through a hidden reader beneath the brass trim. Nothing happened. A gray-haired board director hissed. "What is he doing? He is going to make this worse." Ethan did not turn around. Another executive muttered, "Someone stop him." Charlotte's voice cut through the fear, calm and exact. No one moves toward him. The room obeyed her, but she was not looking at them. She was looking at Ethan's hands. They were steady, scarred only by labor, careful in a way that did not match panic. He removed the panel cover with a butter knife from the dessert table, not forcing it, not breaking it, just finding the seam that maintenance crews knew and millionaires never noticed. Behind the wall, a set of low-voltage wires ran toward the old freight corridor. Ethan studied them for 3 seconds. "Local lockout," he said under his breath. "Not central." Charlotte heard him and understood just enough to ask, "Can you open it?" Ethan looked up. "1 door? Maybe 2. Not all." "Then choose the door that saves the most people." There it was, the first honest command she had given all night. Not to protect stock value. Not to protect reputation. To protect people. Ethan's expression softened for half a heartbeat, and then the storm inside him went quiet again. From the speakers, Grant Mercer laughed. Charlotte, you always did enjoy pretending to be noble when cameras were rolling. Charlotte turned toward the control booth. There are no cameras worth performing for tonight, Grant. There is always a camera, he answered. That is the problem. A few guests looked toward the ceiling domes, suddenly aware that fear could be recorded, edited, and sold before morning. Ethan clipped 2 wires together with a silver serving tong wrapped in a folded napkin. A soft mechanical release clicked somewhere beyond the flower wall. Not loud, not dramatic, but to those nearest the east corridor, it sounded like a prayer finding a door. Ethan lifted one hand, palm down, then pointed to the first table near the pillars. Megan moved immediately. An older couple stood. A mother gathered 2 children. A waiter guided them without speaking. 10 people slipped behind the floral arrangement and vanished into the service passage. No applause. No celebration. Just movement, discipline, grace. Charlotte kept Grant talking while Ethan freed another group. You were fired because you stole from employees, she said. Not from me. From people who trusted their paychecks. The speaker crackled. I was protecting myself. Ethan paused at those words. Protecting myself. He knew that sentence. Many men built prisons out of it and called them shelters. His hand brushed the bracelet Lily had made from blue yarn and plastic beads, hidden under his sleeve. Be safe, Daddy. He inhaled slowly, then turned toward the control booth balcony. Grant had made one mistake. He thought fear gave him control. He had not yet understood that the quietest man in the room had already taken it back. Above the ballroom, hidden behind smoked glass and polished walnut, the private control booth overlooked the gala like a captain's bridge above a glittering sea. Grant Mercer stood there in a charcoal suit, his silver hair combed perfectly, his smile neat enough to pass for confidence if no one listened too closely. Around him, monitors displayed the ballroom from every angle. The golden tables, the ivory flowers, the moonlit skyline beyond the glass, and Charlotte Whitmore standing beneath the grand chandelier with the kind of radiant composure that made even fear seem ashamed to touch her. She was almost painfully beautiful in that moment, not because of the diamonds at her ears or the delicate lines of her gown, but because she refused to let terror make her selfish. Charlotte, Grant said through the speaker, tell them the truth. Tell them how quickly loyalty disappears when a woman like you decides someone is inconvenient. Charlotte lifted her chin. Loyalty does not require me to ignore theft. A board member gasped softly, as if honesty were more dangerous than the locked doors. Ethan heard the exchange while guiding another small group into the service corridor, his face unreadable, his movements precise, gentle, and measured. He had already moved nearly 40 guests away from the center of the room without causing a rush. Not one person had stumbled. Not one child had cried out. The rich, the wait staff, the donors, and the drivers were beginning to follow the same quiet rhythm because Ethan had given them something better than orders. He had given them calm. Megan returned to him with a linen napkin folded around a small flashlight from the coat room. There are more people near the piano, she whispered. They are scared to move. Ethan looked across the floor where the jazz trio's empty instruments sat under the amber glow, shining like abandoned memories. Tell them to count 10 breaths before standing. Slow feet. No talking. What about Miss Whitmore? Ethan's eyes shifted to Charlotte. She saw him from across the room and understood that he was not leaving her behind. Yet something in his expression warned her that the next step would be harder. Grant's voice sharpened. Enough of this little evacuation game. The monitors had shown him too much. One camera turned, then another, until every digital eye found Ethan near the service wall. Grant leaned closer to the microphone. You there? The janitor. The room went still again, but it was a different kind of stillness now. Not helpless. Waiting. Ethan did not answer at first. He carefully closed the panel cover, placed the butter knife on a tray, and stood with the quiet dignity of a man who would not be reduced by the name someone chose for him. I am listening, he said. Grant laughed once. Are you? Because from up here, it looks like you think you are important. Ethan looked toward the booth, though the glass reflected only chandelier light and the bright, nervous faces below. No, he replied. I think they are. A hush moved through the room. Charlotte's eyes softened, and for the first time that night, her perfect public mask cracked into something human, something deeply moved. Grant did not like that. Men like him could tolerate fear, but but not respect given to someone else. Charlotte, he said, bring him with you to the boardroom doors. Now. Several guests whispered at once. Do not go. He cannot make you. Please, stay here. Ethan raised one hand, and the whispers faded. He turned to Megan. When the next door clicks, move the piano side first. But you will be alone. He gave her a faint smile. I have been alone before. Then Ethan walked toward Charlotte through the breathtaking ballroom, past candlelit tables and trembling millionaires, past people who had ignored him for months and now watched him as if grace itself had put on a work shirt. Charlotte met him halfway, tall, elegant, and pale with courage. You do not have to do this, she whispered. Ethan looked at the speech still folded in her hand. Some promises are worth keeping, he said again. And this time, she knew he was not talking about hers. The corridor to the private boardroom was only 70 feet long, yet it felt farther than any road Ethan Walker had taken home after a double shift. On one side, tall windows framed Manhattan in ribbons of white and gold, traffic moving far below like streams of distant stars. On the other, framed portraits of Whitmore founders watched from the walls with proud faces and polished certainty, as if marble, money, and legacy could protect anyone from a broken man with a grudge. Charlotte walked beside Ethan with breathtaking grace, her shoulders straight, her expression calm, her beauty sharpened by courage rather than softened by comfort. Keep your hands visible, Grant ordered through a ceiling speaker. Both of you. Ethan lifted his hands slowly. Charlotte did the same. You are making a mistake, she said. No, Grant answered. I am correcting one. Ethan listened more closely to the voice than to the words. The pauses were too neat. The anger too rehearsed. Grant was not losing control. He was performing control for an audience he believed had finally arrived. That mattered. People who wanted attention could sometimes be slowed by giving them a stage. People who wanted revenge could sometimes be reached by naming the wound beneath it. At the boardroom entrance, a frosted glass door opened with a soft electronic sigh. Inside, the room was stunning in a cold and expensive way. A 30-foot walnut table, leather chairs aligned with military precision, a wall of windows glowing with city light, and a row of tablets waiting beside crystal water glasses. A thick legal packet rested at Charlotte's seat. Her name was already printed beneath a blank signature line. Ethan noticed everything. The tablet nearest the door still had a live building map. The ventilation grill above the credenza trembled every 12 seconds. The old manual release box was hidden behind a modern art panel that no executive would ever touch because it looked too expensive to move. Grant had prepared the theater, but he had forgotten the backstage. Sit, Grant said. Charlotte looked at Ethan. He gave no signal anyone else would recognize, just a slight lowering of his eyes toward the chair nearest the wall display. She understood and chose that seat instead of the one with her name on it. Grant went silent for a beat. I told you where to sit. Charlotte folded her hands on the table. You told me to enter the room. I did. Ethan stood near the door, quiet as snowfall. Grant's irritation sharpened. Janitor, step away from her. Ethan obeyed by 1 foot, no more. What is your daughter's name? Charlotte asked suddenly. Ethan's eyes flicked to her. She had remembered the drawing in his wallet, the edge of pink paper visible when he reached for the access card. Grant gave a dry laugh. How touching. The billionaire finally learns a worker has a family. Ethan's voice stayed low. Her name is Lily. The sound of that name changed the room. Not for Grant. For Charlotte. Her face softened with immediate, aching respect. Then we both know what this night is really about, she said. Children who wait for someone to come home. Grant said nothing. In the ballroom beyond the walls, another service door clicked open. Ethan heard it through the building, the way some men hear thunder before rain. Megan had moved the piano side. More guests were leaving. More lives were becoming distance, breath, safety. Ethan kept his gaze on Grant's reflection in the dark window and saw the control booth door behind him open a fraction. The outside team had reached the upper level. No one in the boardroom knew except Ethan. He lowered his hands by half an inch, just enough for Charlotte to see. Wait. Speak. Hold him here. Charlotte leaned toward the packet and did not pick up the pen. Grant, she said, her voice elegant, steady, almost kind. You do not want my company. You want everyone to admit they stopped seeing you. The speaker crackled with silence. Ethan's pulse slowed. That was the first honest sound Grant had made all night. Grant Mercer did not answer Charlotte right away, and that silence told Ethan more than any confession could have. The frosted glass trembled faintly as the building ventilation shifted, carrying the faraway murmur of guests moving through service corridors below the polished floor. The boardroom remained almost impossibly elegant, washed in silver from the Manhattan skyline, the walnut table gleaming beneath recessed lights, the crystal water glasses untouched like offerings in a room that had forgotten humility. Charlotte sat with breathtaking composure, her blonde hair catching the city glow, her face calm enough to steady anyone who looked at her, though Ethan could see the careful breath beneath her ribs and the brave tension in her hands. "You think this is about being seen?" Grant finally said through the speaker. "I was erased." Charlotte kept her voice gentle. "You were investigated. By people who smiled at me in elevators. By people whose retirement accounts you used as if they were yours." The speaker crackled, and for a moment the grand room seemed to shrink around the truth. Ethan watched the reflection in the window. Behind Grant, on the upper booth level, a narrow door opened another inch, then stopped. The outside team was close, but close was not safe. Not yet. Ethan gave Charlotte the smallest nod. She understood again, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with wealth or status. Trust can be born in years, but sometimes it arrives in a minute when two people choose the same moral ground. "Grant," she said, "look at me, not the cameras. What do you want said out loud?" A low laugh answered, but it broke at the end. "That I built the security expansion. That I warned the board about vulnerabilities. That you praised my work until you needed someone to blame." Charlotte leaned back, her eyes shining with fierce patience. "You did build part of it. You were talented. And then you crossed a line." Ethan shifted one step toward the art panel near the credenza. Grant noticed. "Stop moving." Ethan stopped immediately. No pride. No challenge. Just obedience shaped into strategy. "I am only standing," he said. "You are calculating." "Yes." Charlotte looked at him sharply, but Ethan did not look away from the dark glass. The room held its breath. Grant seemed caught off guard by the honesty. "At least you admit it." Ethan's voice remained quiet. "A father learns to calculate. Rent. Groceries. Fever medicine at 2 in the morning. Which bill waits? Which promise cannot?" Charlotte lowered her eyes for 1 second, and the beauty of her face changed into something deeper than elegance. Compassion. Recognition. Grant scoffed, but it sounded thinner now. "Do not preach to me, janitor." Ethan touched the blue yarn bracelet under his cuff. "I am not preaching. I am telling you that being forgotten hurts. But you do not heal it by making other people afraid." No one spoke. Even the hidden city seemed to pause outside the glass. Then Charlotte reached slowly for the pen beside the packet, not to sign, but to slide it away from herself. "I will say the truth publicly," she said. "All of it. Your work. Your warning. Your theft. Your choices. But I will not lie to make your pain look clean." The microphone picked up Grant breathing. 1 second. 2. 3. Ethan saw the booth door open wider in the reflection, saw a uniformed commander freeze as his eyes landed on Ethan Walker. The man's mouth parted in disbelief. Ethan gave one barely visible shake of his head. "Not now. Not my name. Not yet." The commander on the upper booth level was Chief Daniel Reeves, a broad-shouldered man with gray at his temples and the haunted eyes of someone who had once trusted Ethan Walker with impossible decisions. He stood behind the glass above the boardroom, half hidden by shadows and control monitors, staring at the janitor below, as if a ghost had stepped out of an old service record. Ethan did not move, yet the small shake of his head carried across the distance like an order. "Not my name. Not while she is still here." Chief Reeves understood, though the understanding cost him. He signaled his team to hold position, and the beautiful boardroom stayed balanced on the edge of a secret. Charlotte felt the shift without seeing its source. The air had changed again. Ethan was no longer merely guiding the moment. He was protecting something buried so deep that even danger had not forced it into the light. Grant Mercer kept breathing through the microphone, uneven now, less like a man in command and more like someone standing alone before the mirror of his own choices. "You would put it all on me," Grant said. "That is what people like you do. You keep the building bright and let men like me disappear into the basement." Charlotte looked toward the dark window where his reflection hovered behind hers. She was breathtaking in the quiet, not polished now, but real, with tired blue eyes and a face that held sorrow without surrender. "No," she said. "I let numbers replace names. That was my failure. But your failure was believing pain gave you permission." Ethan glanced at her, and respect passed through his expression like a soft light under a closed door. He had heard powerful people apologize before, but rarely when it could cost them something. "Touching," Grant muttered. "The Queen learns humility just in time for her audience." Ethan stepped closer to the art panel, slowly enough to be seen. "Grant, you built the lower security grid in 2018, he said. The speaker went quiet. Charlotte turned to Ethan. Grant asked, "How would you know that?" Ethan kept his hands relaxed. "Because the service diagrams still carry your initials. Because the east stairwell reader cycles on a 12-second delay. Because the freight corridor door does not answer to the gala system. It answers to the old building line." Grant's voice hardened with surprise. "Who are you?" Ethan did not answer the question. He pressed 2 fingers against the edge of the art panel. It opened less than an inch, revealing the manual release box hidden behind it. In the ballroom, another soft click traveled through the walls. More guests were moving out. Megan was doing exactly what he had asked. Quiet feet. Slow breaths. No panic. Grant heard the click too. "Stop helping them leave." Ethan looked at the speaker, his face calm, almost sorrowful. No, it was the first time he had refused him plainly. The word did not sound proud. It sounded final. Charlotte rose from her chair, elegant and steady, placing herself where Grant could see her through the boardroom camera. "Then keep me," she said. "Let the rest go." Ethan turned sharply. "Miss Whitmore." "No," she said, her gaze never leaving the hidden camera. "This is my company. These are my people." Grant gave a strained laugh. "Now you want to be noble." Charlotte's voice softened. "No, I want to be accountable." Above them, Chief Reeves closed his eyes for 1 second, recognizing the old rhythm. Ethan had created time, separated the frightened from the danger, narrowed the room to words, choices, and one final door. It was the same method from years ago, the one that had saved 32 Americans overseas without a single headline bearing his name. Grant whispered, "Who are you?" This time Ethan looked straight into the camera. "A father," he said, "and I am asking you to let everyone go home." In the silence that followed, even Charlotte understood that the answer was true, but it was not complete. For a long moment, Grant Mercer said nothing, and the hush that filled the boardroom felt almost sacred, as if every polished surface had begun listening for the truth beneath the fear. Charlotte stood beside the walnut table, luminous in the city light, no longer protected by reputation, only by courage. Ethan remained near the open panel, one hand close to the manual release, the other resting loose at his side, calm enough to make time seem slower around him. "A father," Grant repeated through the speaker, his voice thinner now. "That is all." Ethan looked at the small camera above the glass wall. "That is enough." Grant laughed, but the sound did not reach the room with strength. It arrived broken, tired, almost embarrassed. "You talk like a man who has never lost anything." Ethan's eyes lowered for the first time, not in defeat, in memory. "I lost my wife on a Tuesday morning," he said softly. "I lost my uniform a year later because I could not keep being the man everyone saluted and still be the father my little girl needed. I lost friends who thought stepping away meant giving up. But I did not lose myself." Charlotte's expression changed as though a hidden door had opened inside her heart. The breathtaking woman who had entered the night as a billionaire now looked at him as one human being looks at another when money, title, and distance finally fall away. Above them, Chief Daniel Reeves heard every word, and his face tightened with grief and respect. He could not hold the secret any longer. He stepped from the booth level into the upper doorway, visible through the dark glass, and spoke into his radio with a voice that trembled despite years of command. "All teams hold. Captain Walker has control of the room." The words moved through the building system before anyone could stop them. "Captain Walker." In the ballroom below, the remaining guests heard it through the speakers. Megan froze beside the service passage. Board members turned toward one another, stunned into silence. Charlotte looked at Ethan, and the name settled over him like an old coat he had never planned to wear again. Grant heard it too. "Captain," he whispered. Ethan closed the release box with care. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight, I am Lily's dad." Chief Reeves came down the private stair with 2 negotiators behind him, hands visible, voices low, no rush in their steps. Grant did not run. He did not shout. Something in him seemed to collapse inward, not from force, but from the weight of being seen clearly at last. Charlotte spoke first. "Grant, it is over. You can walk out with dignity still left, or you can let bitterness write the last line." Ethan added, "A bad choice does not have to become your whole life." That sentence found the room gently, with grace instead of triumph. The boardroom door opened. Grant stepped out from the control booth corridor, pale, shaken, empty-handed, and surrounded by people trained to end the crisis without turning him into a spectacle. No one cheered. No one mocked him. The city glittered beyond the glass as if heaven itself had dimmed the noise. Charlotte exhaled once, then placed her hand over her heart. Ethan turned away from the cameras, but every person watching had already changed how they saw him. The janitor had disappeared, and in his place stood a quiet man whose hidden past had just made an entire tower forget how to speak. When the final door released, the tower seemed to breathe through every floor at once. Elevators stayed parked, alarms softened into low reminders, and the guests who had escaped through the service corridors gathered in the marble lobby beneath a ceiling painted with dawn-colored clouds. Outside, red and blue lights reflected across rain-slick pavement, but inside there was no chaos anymore, only the strange quiet that follows a night when people realize their money did not save them, their titles did not guide them, and the man they had overlooked had carried them out one careful choice at a time. Charlotte Whitmore stepped from the private hallway with Chief Daniel Reeves at her side, breathtaking in her torn composure, her gown still elegant, her face bare of performance, her eyes searching until they found Ethan Walker near the service cart. He had returned to the ballroom alone. The crystal tables were crooked now, napkins scattered, candles burned low, the skyline paling from black to violet beyond the windows. Ethan bent down, picked up the mop he had left against the wall, and set the bucket upright as if finishing the work mattered because leaving things better still mattered. A senior board member approached him, the same man who had mocked him earlier, his expensive jacket wrinkled, his voice small. "Mr. Walker," he said, then stopped, ashamed by how unfamiliar respect felt on his tongue. Ethan looked at him without anger. "Sir." The man swallowed. "I was wrong." Ethan nodded once. "Then be right tomorrow." No speech could have struck harder. Charlotte heard it and lowered her eyes, not from weakness, but from reverence. Chief Reeves stepped forward, his voice thick with memory. "Captain, the department owes you more than thanks." Ethan shook his head gently. "I did not do it for the department." "Then for who?" Ethan reached into his pocket and removed his phone. The screen was cracked at one corner, the case decorated with a faded sticker of a purple star. A missed video call from Lily glowed there, followed by one voice message. He pressed play, and a little girl's sleepy voice filled the empty ballroom. "Daddy, I spelled tomorrow right. Please come home safe. I saved you a pancake for morning." No one moved. Not Charlotte. Not the board. Not the officers near the doorway. All the grandeur in that room bowed before one child's simple faith. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, Charlotte was standing in front of him. "I am sorry," she said. "For tonight," he asked. "For every day I walked past you and thought seeing the building meant seeing everyone inside it." Ethan studied her, and there was no bitterness in him, only the tired grace of a man who had made peace with being underestimated. "Most people look where the lights are," he said. "That does not make them cruel. It just means they need reminding." Charlotte smiled through tears she did not hide. "Then let me remember correctly. By sunrise, every news camera outside wanted the hero, the captain, the secret past, the silence of the tower." Ethan gave them none of that. He signed his statement, thanked Megan by name, accepted a paper cup of coffee, and walked into the pale morning with his work jacket over one arm. Charlotte followed him to the curb, where the city smelled of rain, exhaust, and new beginnings. A cab waited. Ethan opened the door, then paused when she said, "Will I see you again?" He looked toward the east, where daylight was touching the tops of glass buildings with a mercy no one could buy. "I work the night shift," he said softly. "But today, I am going home to my daughter." Charlotte nodded, understanding that real dignity does not ask to be chased. It simply walks in the right direction. And as Ethan disappeared into the waking city, the people of Whitmore Tower stood behind him in complete silence, not because they had lost words, but because they had finally learned respect.